Hi there. In this episode, a tour of my home studio. Several people requested this and I finally got around to doing it. It's actually going to be two tours. I decided that this would be a good opportunity for me to trim my studio gear. If you're like me, from time to time you go through periods of expansion and contraction. You move gear around with the hope to make your studio more efficient. Sometimes it's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It never seems to work because maybe your studio is too small or it just doesn't have a really good layout. I'm also thinking about trying to go mixerless again, but that will be a different episode. I currently have 3 multi-tier keyboard racks set up. At one time I had something like 18 keyboards set up using many racks and shelf space. It was very cramped in my studio, and it's a fairly large space. It's about 15 feet by 14 feet, with another 20 square feet over by the side of the bathroom. Also, during my crazy stage, I had another 20 plus sound modules, not including effects and other devices. Some people might think that all that gear would look impressive, and for a YouTube audience, a director and a producer, it might. Yet, I never showed that gear until this small studio tour. You don't need that much hardware anymore, especially for my musical focus, which is composing. I only used 5 or 6 of the keyboards, and really, it was only 3 of them that I used regularly. I sold off some of the keyboards first, and it was very tough to do. Then I sold off about 17 sound modules. Definitely some regret in doing that. Yet, if I still had them, they would just be in racks gathering dust. I'm down to 11 or 12 keyboards now, and 5 sound modules. That is still way too many. They are essentially sitting in the studio, on racks, covered up, waiting to die. Most of the modules don't get that much use either. I purchased an XV5080 about 9 months ago, and I couldn't tell you why. If you've seen other episodes, you know that after several years, I turned on the Juno 106 to make an episode, and one of its voice chips was acting up, and then it totally died on me halfway through the episode. For another episode, I turned on the D70, and half the keyboard was dead. This doesn't happen with software. Why do I put myself through all this hardware grief? I ask myself this a lot. It's nostalgia. These are my babies. I've said that before. It's hard to give them up, even if it only means boxing them and putting them under a bed, so they would be available if I ever needed them for a project. I probably need to go to GA, Gear Anonymous, to work on my addiction. And from what I've read in the comments, I'll probably see a lot of you folks there, so save me a seat. I'm going to try to reduce the keyboards in my studio by half or more. It would be nice to have some open space around me to film episodes and not feel like the walls are closing in on me. It's going to be incredibly hard. At some point, I'll try to reduce the rack modules also. I would like to access the Kronos, one of the XV88s, the Wavestation, QS7, DX7, AX80, and the Juno 106. But I really don't play the last 3 keyboards anymore, at least not very much. I know for sure that I'm going to box the Roland D70 and Alesis QS6. The AX80, the Juno 106, and the DX7 also need to be boxed and put away. I haven't used those 3 keyboards since I did episodes on them, but I can't sell them. The money that I would get for them wouldn't mean to me as much as turning them on every couple of years and reminiscing about when I played live or when they were practically all I had to compose music. That leaves the Kronos, 2 XV88s, Wavestation, QS7, and Poly 800. One of the XV88s can be boxed and I have a massive road case for it. I'm hoping I can be strong and make some hard decisions on the other gear. You'll see how it turns out in the second tour later in this episode. I could probably do with purging some guitars also. Here's the first tour of the studio as it is today. This is a Manuel Rodriguez E-Series, nylon string classical guitar. Sitting to the right of Manuel is a 2004 50th anniversary Fender American Deluxe Stratocaster. I purchased that guitar new when I started guitar lessons in 2004, and I love it. I love it so much I purchased a second one, which is brand new in the case, in the box. Guitar players everywhere are going to say I'm crazy, but I know what I like. If I'd been smart, I would have purchased a Les Paul. I had been looking at the Les Paul Standard. They were about the same price. Instead, I went low cost on a Les Paul copy and purchased a Brownsville Choir Boy, and it's okay. It's the one facing the wall. Over on this side, there's an American Fender Highway 1 Telecaster. I picked that up on sale at Guitar Center. Next, the big black box is an Event 2020 S250 15-inch subwoofer. Sitting on it is a Tascam DR100 Mark II digital field recorder. Under the ladder is a Roland D550 that just looks like a black box. In the short mic stand are an AKG CS1000S and a short SM57. I used that combo to mic the Roland Cube 60. Not that, the Cube 60, which has been a really good amp for me. To the left is a Takamine or a Takamine EG544SC 4C. I believe the 4C relates to the type of preamp module it has. Someone told me that Takamine made this model guitar specifically to be sold at Guitar Center, but I don't know for sure. That's an Ibanez Soundgear bass with active pickups. I'm not a bass player, but I've played it on some tracks and it's been just fine. There's the Korg Poly 800 Mark II. It's my fun little corgi. This rack is currently set up with only 2 tiers. On the bottom tier is the original XV88 I purchased in 2000. On the top tier is an original wave station from 1990. Above that is one of 4 monitors connected to my main PC. This one is a 32-inch model running in 1080p. Sometimes I'll sit here and work out a part. I can run Cubase from here using the wireless keyboard or bring over Touch Portal on an iPad Pro. This is where I charge batteries for everything. So many devices today take rechargeable batteries. This is an FBV longboard for controlling a Pod Pro XT rack guitar effects processor. This is usually where I'm sitting when I'm composing. I have 2 27-inch 1080p monitors in a portrait orientation. The center monitor is a 40-inch 4K monitor. I have additional monitors I'd like to set up, but I haven't done it yet. I like a lot of monitors. I love the Korg Kronos X88, that's my master controller. The iPad Pro 12.9-inch Gen 1 above the Kronos on the left is used only to run Touch Portal. It's hard to see the old iPad 9.7-inch Gen 2 above the PC keyboard. I used to run a second set of Touch Portal icons on it, but since the company updated the software, the Gen 2 won't support it anymore. I'm going to use that to run my RME UFX remotely. I already have the software installed and it's been working great. I will be looking at using it to do even more with the RME when I try to go mixerless again. This really only works if I can thin out my gear. I use the Stream Deck XL for controlling Cubase and other apps. I have 5 PC computers in the studio, 4 desktops and 1 laptop. I'll put the specs up on the screen. None of them are particularly new or fast anymore. Under the desk on the left is an HP computer I picked up off of Amazon on an expired lease. It was a good price. It does internet duties and some backup duties. The PC on the right is my main music PC. It's getting long in the tooth, and while it's still adequate, I plan to replace it in the near future. This is a Yamaha 01V96i digital mixing console. It's been reliable and has some great functionality, but lately it's developed a few issues, which is why I'm considering trying to go mixerless again. That Rode wireless mic set in the center was delivered while I was making this episode. I'm going to try it out in the next episode or perhaps later in this one. I use the laptop to write screenplays and for other non-music work. In the rack from top to bottom, one of 3 Furman rack power bars. My audio interface is an RME UFX first generation. A Lexicon PCM81, a TC Helicon Voice Live rack. 3 Lexicon multi-effects processors, 1 MPX 550, and 2 MPX 500s that have been upgraded to 550 specs. An Alesis Quadraverb, because when you want 80s budget multi-effects, the Quadraverb is king. An Alesis QSR sound module, a digital music MX8 MIDI switcher with merging and other functionality, a classic Roland Dep5 digital multi-effects processor from the mid-80s, a headphone distribution amp because I've recorded some small ensembles in here. On the bottom, the second of 3 Furman power bars. On the second column at the top is the 3rd Furman power bar, a Korg Wave Station AD sound module, the I don't know why I purchased it Roland XV5080 sound module, a Korg Wave Station SR sound module, a Line 6 Pod Pro XT. Yeah, I don't like that it's red, but I like how it sounds. A Motu 2408 Mark II that I use to convert keyboard line signals to ADAT to get them into the mixer and then into the RME UFX. A Focusrite Twin Track Pro Platinum preamp. An ancient DVD VHS unit that is good for converting VHS to DVD and then ripping the DVDs to files. On the floor underneath that is another Motu 2408 Mark I. This is the second Roland XV88, the first one being to its right. Lately, I've been sitting or standing behind the XV88 looking at the camera. I don't want it in the center of the room, but I used it to shoot a few episodes and I've been having fun with it. Here is the second 3-tier rack with a Yamaha DX7 2FD on top. There's an Akai AX80 on the center tier and a Roland D70 on the bottom tier. On the last 3-tier rack, I have a Roland Juno 106 on the top. In the middle is an Alesis QS6, and on the bottom is a QS7. Don't mind the crazy portable air conditioner. My house does have central air conditioning. I use the portable unit on mild days when turning on the AC would be overkill for the house, but the studio with all its heat generating gear needs a little cooling. This rack over here is the elephant graveyard of the studio. It used to hold many of the sound modules I sold. Most of the equipment that is in it now was stored in boxes. I moved the equipment into this rack so the rack would have some use. Starting at the top is a Yamaha MJC8 MIDI router. Then a Motu 2408 Mark I, a 24-channel Nutrix patch bay, two Alesis ADAT XTs, a PB40 Furman 20-channel patch bay, another Yamaha MJC8 MIDI router. These MIDI routers and patch bays were used with a lot of the sound modules that I used to have in this rack before I did that big purge I spoke about. On the bottom is an old Digitech Studio Vocalist. This was my first hardware harmony processor. It's built like a tank and it still works. Under the third keyboard rack are two more PC computers. The first is an old Xeon workstation. This was my main music computer for about a decade. It's been through many upgrades. I built it circa 2008 when it started its life with an Intel i7 920 CPU in a much smaller case. It's had all kinds of uses since I built a new main music PC in 2019. It's hosted sample libraries, kind of like a sound module. It's been a dedicated video render station, and most recently, a data server. Next to it is another off-lease computer I picked up on Amazon pretty cheap. I upgraded both of these off-lease computers from 8 gigabytes of RAM to 32 gigabytes of RAM. I also upgraded their CPUs to the most current, cost-effective, fastest CPU the motherboard would allow. Here's the second tour after the purge. That was pretty intense. At least it was for me. It was a lot of work. During this episode, you saw the 4 Mackie HR824 studio monitors I use. I purchased one pair new, circa 2000, and the other pair used, circa 2016. They sound good, they have been reliable, and I have 24 years of using them to mix and monitor. Also, I have a set of TOA ME265 monitors that I once used alongside the Mackies, just to compare mixes. I don't use them anymore. In fact, I don't think I've used them in 2 decades. I didn't go through my mic collection, which ain't much. I have a Neumann U87 because I like how my voice sounds using it, a Shure SM57, Shure SM58, 3 AKG CS1000 mics, a few no-name and miscellaneous mics, and a Radio Shack version of an SM58 that I purchased circa 1983 and used to gig with back in the 80s. There is quite a lot more gear, but it's not in the studio. It's stored in boxes or in other rooms in the house, so I'm not going to go through it. It's music gear and probably some gear that I use doing indie film. Much of it is gear that I should have sold long before it became worth a lot less than it is, so I'm keeping it. You probably noticed all the cables lying around when I showed the first video of the studio before the purge. Originally, I was going to thin out the gear in the studio without making it part of this studio tour. I had already started pulling out cables and boxing up gear. I actually had to bring back a few items so I could show you how it looked before the purge. I'm very happy with the outcome. I think it looks a lot better now. It's a much cleaner look, it's more open, and I'm enjoying the space. You can tell me in the comments your opinion of the change, good or bad. If you think it stinks, you can tell me that in the comments. Just be polite. I was strong enough to purge the second Roland XV88, the Roland D70, the Alesis QS6, and the Yamaha DX7 2FD. And the last one was really hard to do. I also purged some rack mount gear that includes the Alesis QSR, the Korg Wavestation SR, 2 Lexicon MPX 500s, and the Quad Reverb. I wasn't strong enough to purge the Roland Juno 106 or the Akai AX80, and you probably noticed them in the second video tour sitting on the counter right over there. While I was working on a project a few years ago, I needed a transition sound, and I created a modified white noise sweep on the Juno 106. And I just wonder if that's ever going to come up again. It makes sense to have some true analog in the studio, or at least something that I can play with some knobs and buttons and get it the way I want it really quickly. The Roland Depth 5 is going to stay in the rack because it's what I run the Akai AX80 through, and the AX80 is an active keyboard in the studio. I didn't purge any guitars. You may have noticed that I purchased a new iPad, which I'm using to run a second set of touch portal icons to control sound libraries and VST instruments. You can see it in the second video tour above the PC keyboard. The old iPad 9.7 Gen 2 is now sitting in a stand on the far right of the desk with the RME software running on it. Here is a picture of most of the cables I don't need anymore after purging all this gear. There are power cables, MIDI cables, and audio cables. There's even a drop snake. I had already put some away before I took this picture, which is why you won't see the line lump power supplies for the QSR and the Quad Reverb. Every time I do this, it's a very painful experience, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here. It's not just all the work of moving gear around, it's letting things get boxed up or letting them go, because I've decided to sell a few items. The Wavestation SR, the QSR, 2 of the Lexicons, and I don't know, I may look at some of the keyboards that are not in the studio right now. Definitely not the DX7, but the D70 and the QS6, I'm probably going to sell them. I've been getting better at sitting on my hands when it comes to purchasing hardware, and I love how comfortable the studio feels now. I still have another problem, and that's software. I can't resist buying vocal libraries and really sample libraries in general if I think they will be useful to me. The good thing is they don't take up any physical space. I'm going to do a music software tour in the near future, probably January or February of 2025. You'll get to see all the software I own inside my composing template. I'll probably play some favorites, but there won't be a ton of playing because there's just a lot of software to go through. Feel free to share your purge and studio rearranging stories in the comments. Misery loves company. Thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll be back in another episode soon.